I thought I knew everything about him. How could I not, after 12 years of marriage? But that week, our trip to the lake house for what was supposed to be a reconnection retreat, I discovered secrets that shattered everything I thought I understood about the man I called my husband. We had been drifting for a while. His hours at the office grew later, and I noticed he was even more evasive when I asked about his day. But on that vacation, his double life came crashing down. It was the second night. I had forgotten my phone charger and borrowed his. As I plugged in my phone, an alert lit up his screen. A child's photo, no more than 6 years old, with the message, "Good night, Daddy." For a moment, I thought it was a strange glitch, maybe a friend's child? But no, the message was clear, and my pulse quickened. Who was this child? I couldn't stop myself. I scrolled through his texts, breathing in sharp, shallow breaths, each message a new stab to my heart. There were countless photos, birthdays, park trips, and even ordinary little moments of a life I didn't know he had. His second family lived only a couple of hours from us, in the same city. A woman, 2 children, a whole second world he had kept hidden for years. The anger washed over me like a wave, drowning out everything else. I walked out of our room, the phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. He was sitting by the fireplace, oblivious. He looked up, met my eyes, and I saw the truth settle there, the realization of his own exposure. What is this? I held out the phone, demanding an answer, my voice tight with rage and disbelief. He had no excuses, no apologies that mattered. The worst part? He barely flinched. It was as though this moment, his lies laid bare, was just another fact of his life, something to be managed, like one of his business meetings. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, his voice flat, almost bored. That night, I packed my bags, left the lake house, and walked out of his life. I didn't even let him explain. There was nothing left for him to say that would ever make a difference. As I drove away, the road ahead blurred by my tears, I knew I'd never be the same. I felt like a ghost, everything familiar had been stripped away in a single devastating moment. He was just a stranger now, a man who had stolen 12 years of my life to lead his own twisted double existence. Driving back from the lake house, I felt raw and exposed, like I'd been flayed alive. I was miles from anywhere familiar, with only the hum of the road and the ache in my chest for company. I needed answers, and my thoughts returned again and again to the children's photos. The older girl looked like him, same dimple in her cheek, same warm brown eyes. And the woman in some of the pictures. She was smiling, so happy, so oblivious, just like I had been. I couldn't let it go. I wanted to turn a blind eye, to close that chapter without delving deeper into his twisted double life. But something inside me snapped, demanding justice, or at least some kind of reckoning. I made a U-turn and drove straight back into town, arriving just before dawn. Once there, I found myself parked outside his office, scanning through more messages. He'd mentioned his weekend family, as though they were nothing more than appointments to be scheduled. My breath hitched at the realization of how systematic he'd been. It was a double life built on double lies, carefully maintained boundaries, and routines, all woven together to sustain this web. I waited until the office opened, then walked in like any other appointment. By now, rage had replaced any lingering heartache, and I went straight to the receptionist, asking for an urgent meeting with him. The receptionist recognized me, of course. After all, I was his wife. She gave me a polite smile, told me to wait, and dialed his number. A minute later, he appeared from behind his glass panel door, looking startled but composed, as though he'd been expecting this day all along. We met in his office, the scene as sterile as ever. White walls, polished desk, a few certificates and framed photos. Just not of me, not even one. He shut the door and turned to me, as if preparing for a negotiation, something clinical, routine. "So, here we are," he began, his tone more exhausted than remorseful. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." "No, you don't owe me an explanation, Thad," I said, voice trembling as I tried to keep from screaming. "You owe me years of my life back. But since that's not possible, let's just get to the point. How long have you been doing this?" He sighed, looking out the window, avoiding my gaze. "It's complicated. I thought I could handle it, keep it separate." That was the point. Separate. I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "Thad, this isn't about business portfolios. These are people. Children who think you're their father. A wife who thinks you love her." He looked back at me finally, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a flicker of regret. But it passed, replaced by the calculated, detached look I'd come to recognize as his armor. It's over now, he said, tone resolute. I'll handle things. I'll make sure that everyone's taken care of. Taken care of? The words felt like poison in my mouth. I didn't ask to be taken care of. I gave you everything, Thad, everything. And this is how you repay me. I know. He turned away, his back to me as he adjusted the cuff of his shirt, his final dismissal. It hit me then. He'd made up his mind. To him, I was just one side of his life, something he could shed without a second thought, an inconvenience now that the truth was out. You're a monster, I whispered, more to myself than to him. And without another word, I walked out of his office, into the blinding daylight, a free woman but utterly lost. That was the last time I saw him. Later, I learned he'd gone to great lengths to keep his double life hidden. And the very day I walked out of that office, he left town for business, never returning. A year later, through court proceedings, I discovered his second family knew as little about me as I had about them. But I didn't go to the papers, didn't expose him. There was no need. He'd already destroyed himself, caught in a trap of his own making, leaving behind nothing but the ashes of two lives he'd once thought he could keep separate forever. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life piece by piece, but everything reminded me of him and the years I'd spent in a lie. Friends offered their sympathies, telling me I was better off without him, but they couldn't understand the depth of betrayal. It wasn't just losing a husband, it was losing the version of my life I'd believed in. Finally, I moved out of our home. Too many memories lingered in every corner, the dinners he'd missed with excuses, the whispered late-night phone calls he'd claimed were urgent client matters. I took the essentials, left the rest, and found a small place across town to start fresh. It was lonely and, at times, unbearably quiet, but I needed the space to come to terms with what had happened. Months later, I heard from him one last time. A letter appeared in my mailbox, no return address, in his meticulous handwriting. I froze, part of me wanting to throw it away unread, but curiosity won out. Inside, he wrote, I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. It sounds hollow, I'm sure, and it can't begin to repair the damage I caused. I thought I could manage both lives, keep you both happy without hurting anyone. But lies have a way of catching up with us. I realize now that I wasn't just lying to you and her, but to myself, believing I could build a life without ever facing the consequences. There were no promises to change, no vows to seek forgiveness. Just that apology, followed by a single line that struck me like a final blow. I hope one day you'll remember the good parts of our time together. I crumpled the letter, feeling the weight of his words, that haunting mix of regret and selfishness, lingering in the room. He still couldn't see the full extent of his betrayal. But I decided that day that I was done carrying his lies. The scars he left would always be there, but they didn't have to define me. I rebuilt my days piece by piece, finding joy in small routines, in new friendships, in the quiet of a life lived honestly. I even found a part-time job at a local art gallery, something I'd always dreamed of doing. Little by little, I felt myself coming back to life, this time on my terms. Looking back now, I can finally accept that my story was never really about him. It's about survival, about finding strength in the wreckage. His secret life might have torn my world apart, but it didn't break me. And that, I think, is my victory, the life I reclaimed, not because of him but despite him.